as day is coming out, this is a great turnout for a stormy Saturday. Welcome to the third of our 5-part Native American history series. We're very excited for today's presentation. More Montaukett ministers who ministered to the Native Americans on this end of the island. We are sponsored by Third House Nature Center and the Suffolk County Parks Department. We have a few more very interesting topics coming up besides today's. On May 10th is our Josephine Smith is speaking about Algonquin burial practices, and on May 24th, Chief Harry Wallace is going to speak about religious practice. Today we have Dr. Denise Evans Shepard. She is a Montauk descendant, and she's also the executive director of the Oyster Bay Historical Society. Thank you very much, and welcome to Weeks.
Hello, everyone. I want to say thank you for coming out today on this crazy day. It took us 2 hours to get here. Why? Maybe not for counting watch today, so it took me a while to get here, but I'm here, and you're here, and you streets it even better. Yeah, be all hey, adapter. Where's? Oh, sure. Okay. Sorry, it hasn't blessed with the kids. But this is a beautiful portrait that was commissioned by Robert Herbert. And it's of the young local Cuffee, who was the pastor of the Shinnecock and the Shinnecock people here on Long Island. It was commissioned in 1939, and it hangs in the Yaphank building. And I'm just going to need you to be in the bottom part of this tribute with this poor Cuffee, an any creature of the Shinnecock tribe, humble, pious, offended, passable, testifiably to the gospel of God, died March 17th at the age of 55 years old. We are going to discuss the family of Reverend Cuffee and how religion had basically interrelated with the Indigenous tribes of Long Island. I'm not sure how well anyone may know about the Great Awakening here throughout the 13 tribes or the 13 nations or colonies of the country or in the country. But the New Light ministers were a group of people and preachers that wanted to do something different to bring in the fold of Indigenous people. They wanted the people to learn more about how to convert them to Christ, bring them into religion, and convert them into, something different. They were receiving a lot of pushback from the pastors that are here or that were here at that time. They were into, making it a little bit different by teaching their practices to the Massey people here and throughout the Birch Conference. So with the Indigenous people, they were more or less trying to, control them because they needed more time to learn about them and to learn about how they could teach their practices to the masses. So you figure they were leaving Rockaway, traveling, east to Montauk and learning about Jesus and learning about the religious practices, but they were doing it in a way that many Indigenous people would understand. So the leadership of John Edwards and George Whitefield, who were prominent relying on the step-up time, were really teaching to the large masses of people. Okay. And they introduced the emotional way of preaching, which caused a lot of havoc for regular preachers of that time, whether they were Calvinist and Methodist. Long Island was like a melting pot of different religions. And this religious practice was a little bit extra for many to understand. Many of them were prominent in educational schools such as Dartmouth, Princeton, and Yale. And they were basically trying to bring in some sort of understanding of how Native to be and play a part of their religious entity. Can you guys hear me back there?
We're just concerned. It was my side, and I'm worrying about the mind and gave feedbacks.
Okay, I can hear. Still? Yes. So, I can bear.
No, it's the microphone. It's the speakers.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Would there be there? Right.
Can you hear me?
Right, you hear it's like feedback on it. Maybe you should turn that.
You point the north towards your mouth field.
I can turn it down a little bit.
Can you see?
What do I in your outfit? You said, yeah. That's tight. That's how close you want to get. You want to make part of your face.
We're just at ease.
But I could hear it, and I was tripping over my word that was part of what the.
That sounds better.
Okay. Big.
Yeah. And but I was like, oh, okay. So in 1740, the New Light ministers were changing their way of preaching. They were very instrumental in bringing a lot of people into the fold. They were out there ministering to people, and not in churches, but into big grassy fields such as the one that you see outside. They were trying to make the natives convert into the God that they met. But little did they know, the natives already knew that God. They just didn't understand how they knew that same God. The natives were into learning through the trees, through the streams, through the animals, who God was. They just didn't call him God. They called him something else, which was the great creator. They were the caretakers of this land. So they knew who they were in relation to. But through Europeans' eyes, they didn't see them as that. They looked at them as aliens or savages and things of that nature. Where's that? They were the initial AI people. They knew about when the changes of the wind was going to be, or the changes of the sea, and how the crops would grow. So they were more or less misunderstood from the beginning, and the misconceptions of who they were as people, were misunderstood. But as they learned more about their culture, they recognized this, and they saw how they interacted with people during powwow. They recognized how they interacted with people during different parts of the year. When they were doing a lot of, I guess, holiday, however you want to name it, and in the European way, it was something that resonated with the Indigenous people because they did a lot of that during powwow or during the time that they were happy. When they used their drum, they saw how excited they were and how instrumentals they were. Okay. So they looked at that and they recognized how they could actually be in tune and meshed with each other. Okay. So in 1740, when Isaiah Horton of Southfield, who was a graduate of Yale, decided to really start his first ministry, he recognized the group of people that he wanted to bring into the fold, which was the Indigenous people. We started from the Rockaways and Queens, and he started gaining momentum as he traveled throughout Long Island and Montauk, which was called Jerusalem at the time. He had a large following of people. So the New Light ministers, they knew what they need to do in order to get their mission accomplished. which was to bring and convert people, and the indigenous people, more so into God's way. Well, excuse me, like I said, I don't have the impressive. Okay, so in 1750, Peter John began this mission at Pustapak and established their first parish. Parish meaning not so much of a church, but as I mentioned, into the fields. Maybe they met under a tent or some type of awning that could gather as many people as possible to learn about God and how they could be converted from whatever they were preaching at that time to Christ. So he also preached to a smaller group at Shinnecock, Iceland, and Brady. Okay, doing Isaiah Horton was doing this ministry. He also went up to Shelter Island, which was the Manhattans were going to be bought by as well. So between 1758 and 1760, Reverend Peter John networked Beverage in St. Oakham. And when he visited Gymnastic Mauritius and Quad area, this is right around the time and birth of his grandson, Paul Cuffee. So Peter John and Sam in Oakham met with the native in his particular area. Okay, and at that time, their grandson, Paul Cuffee, was born. Okay, and he was employed by the William Smith estate, the St. George's Manor. Reverend Elisha Payne of Bridgehampton was a lifelong friend of Eliza Wheelock, a trustee of Dartmouth from 1774 to 1801. And at Cape Town, Elisha Payne founded Indian man named Peter John. So this was the grandson, or the grandfather, I should say, not Elisha Payne, but Peter John was the grandfather of Paul Cuffee, okay, who was another person. So he recognized Elisha Payne, how gifted and how he interrelated with the natives here and was able to convert more people into Christianity, okay? And when Samson Oakham left this area, he took his place as the pastor of Indigenous people. Elisha Payne of Bridgehampton was also a lifelong friend of Eliza Wheelock and trustee of Dartmouth College from 1774. So basically this was the saying that I showed. But these are the areas where they taught, which was Commute Place, Wading River, Puspatuck, and along the riverbank in Connecticut. So they basically had formed some sort of trail, I should say, that people from Rockaway all the way to the end here of Montauk met to hear about God, to hear about Christ, and to convert more people into the light of the majority of mainstream people. Peter John's grandson, Paul Cuffee, was of the strict congregational churches, is believed to be the second sons of Peter Cuffee. His mother was a member of the Native American Congregational Church. Wait a minute. Paul Cuffee was born in 1757. Again, he was the son of Peter Cuffee and Jane, the daughter of Reverend Peter John, and his wife, Peggy Amontoke. He was also part of the strict congregational church and was the son of 7 children of Peter Cuffee. And he was born in Wading River, in the town of Brookhaven, but it was before it became part of the town of Riverside. Cuffee, Peter Cuffee, he might be served in, it's so funny because many of the archives showed that Native Americans really didn't play a part of any of the wars that were here or prior to the Civil War. But there were a lot of indigenous people that did participate in the war. And basically there were 2 registers of Peter Cuffee who served in the French and Indian War and was listed in the Ellis Ann's Eastern Battalion in Fort Ticonderoga in 1758. He was also indentured. Many people are unaware that Indigenous people were indentured back then, or even enslaved, but they were. However, there's really no document that indicates that on record. Only from, I guess, journals that indicate that he was a indentured servant of Frederick Hudson up to the age of 21. They married Hannah, who was the daughter of Smiles and Robin, who were both people of color, and they were 5 of their 7 children that survived him. He moved to the Pustatuk territory until he finally settled in the Shinnecock territory in 1894. Okay. He was employed by the Union Missionary Society to labor with them on pulpits. So again, you have someone who demonstrated their concern and conversion to Christ, and he utilized people that many of the Indigenous people could relate to, such as Samson Oko, who taught more so of the self-preservation and determination of people. He recognized how strict the laws were becoming for people of color in and around that time when he was trying to convert and bring more people into the fold. So you have Peter Don as well as Cuffee that were doing the same, but they also had their own way of dealing with their people. 12 years later, Paul was ordained in 1790 at the Puspatuck Church on the reservation by the ministers of the Connecticut Convention as Congregationalists and Presbyterian. Now, like I said, Long Island was a melting pot of religions. You had Quakerism, so led by George Fox. You had so many different people that were bringing their own point of views, and they all wanted to make sure that, I guess, every guy had a seat at their table. Okay, he was now an official preacher on a circuit that took him as far east as Montauk, which is here. And Paul's journey was mostly done by walking, as most Indigenous people, they walked, such as Stephen Talk Hacksparrow, walked. They all had that way of ministering. Okay, in 1798, Paul Cuffee was employed by the New Missionary Society to labor with some more topics. And it's funny because I believe he's the only person on record that showed that he was receiving payment of doing so. Your colonist, Reverend Lyman Beecher of East Hampton and Reverend David Schuyler Bogart of South Dep welcomed Reverend Paul Cuffee to their pulpits. So now they're getting into the part of assimilation. Now you're getting into the part of acculturation, where he feels, or they feel comfortably, allowing Indigenous people to minister to European eats, which is somewhat unheard of, but they allowed Paul Cuffee to do so. And that was that's a big piece right there. So you figure they went from to spirituality that they knew, and now you're converting them into another denomination. It just really feeling hard, but it happened. And in order for them to feel a sense of peace and a sense of belonging, this is what made this religion more comfortable for Indigenous people to become part of. In 1801, Reverend Paul Cuffee is mentioned in the New York Missionary Society's annual report, and it indicated the meek and laborious Paul Cuffee continues to perform his missionary duties towards his fellow Indians in a manner satisfactory to the director. His salary is $80 per annum. He is also mentioned in the New York Missionary Society's annual report in 1803. So as I mentioned, he's receiving payment, which is something that a lot of Indigenous people were not receiving. And that was a lot of money back then. So from 1798 to 1812, Reverend Paul Cuffee preached at Islip, probably the Oakdale or Connecticut riverbank, Puspatuck Reservation. Montauk, and Canute Place. So those are the areas where he was able to speak to his brother. And then depicted in this picture, some of them were still into the tribal culture, the tribal regalia. But they're listening because they understood what he was saying, because they spoke his language. Many Europeans were not familiar with the language. And I think that was harder for them to bring him in. And this is why they had people such as Paul Cuffee, Sense and Oldcom, to relay the message that they could understand. This is his burial place. He died at New Place in Union Burial Ground on March 7, 1812, at the age of 55 years old. In 2 days. If you're interested in learning more about this religious journey, we can look into the strict Congregational Church records, the New York Missionary Society records bounded in 1796, the Suffolk County, the book of Reverend Paul Cuffee and Quad Burgess at the 18th and Mortgage, the obituaries published in 2 New Jersey newspapers, Last of the Montauk, Palladium of Liberty, March 16th, 1812, and the Centennial of Freedom, March 13th, 1812. That's it. Does anybody have questions?
Why is poor Cuffee's grave all by itself down next to the road tracks in the interways?
Well, I would assume, and I don't want to assume, but if I were to think, when the railroad came through, they dismantled a lot of the cemeteries and headstones that were already there. So their thought was to, go right through Indigenous land, which happened, not recognizing, or maybe they did know, that there were people of
So that area was at one time a larger cemetery?
I would assume so, because most of Indigenous people would be buried with each other or sometimes behind our backyard, right? So it may have been a community or settlement that was displaced.
So we don't really know.
I would assume if you would go to like the town hall or the town records, they could possibly let you know what might have been in that area. So the planning and development, I know Shasta County, YouTube kind of researched that by going through the planning development department, looking at old maps, researching different, family members that might have been there in that community at that time. And there are maps that can show, or even census information that can show where people lived and who lives next to them. But 1790 was the first federal census, so it might be difficult to see anything prior to that, but you never know, may get lucky.
Oh, all right, I did something to that, didn't he? Oh, sure, I'm sorry. Yeah, I asked the same question that the gentleman asked.
Why is it, there's only one tombstone there, but I did find other references to people in some very early newspapers being buried there.
But I just haven't had time to research or get, needs to research it, but there are other people that were buried there. In fact, one of them was one of his brothers. See.
Oh, why do you think these obituaries were in the New Jersey cable? Those two west,
So far from home now.
right. Maybe, I don't know. I would assume that there would be more information about Old Cuffee in this area. And I guess it's there, but certain people you have to have a passion for looking for certain documents. Sometimes you may look at something and not even know what you're looking at. Like me. And then you reveal it later on. You have to go back to that document and really look at it and read between the lines, so to speak. But like Sandra was saying, that it might, If you look for it, you'll find it.
Yeah, and my theory on that is that New Jersey was part of New York at one time, and in that New York Missionary Society, it's just my theory, would send people over to the original part of New York, which is in Jersey, part of it, and to preach he felt too, and then it became New Jersey. But it's just my theory, because I had that question too. I did not get them the questions.
She sets me a phone. How you doing?
Yes. Thank you for the presentation. I'd like to know if any of the religious organizations like the Congregational Church and Missionary Society kept member lists.
They should. They should, absolutely. Most churches do. I'm not sure about, but yeah, because it was listed that they would have like a resource of their members. And how far back they go, I don't know. And that could be a problem too. I know that many Atheist churches, they have like a registry of the people that were the pastors of that church at that time. But I would check. I'm quite sure you'll find a lot. You'll both.
Yeah, Michael. Over in James Court, that was strict, as you know, with strict congregationals and stuff in the church split. They had membership lists. But back in the 16 and 1700, they're going to go in the other room. Also, when they had membership lists, a lot of time the people of color and the indentured people, which were both Indians and people and African slaves, they would have to, even though they were considered a member, they would stand outside the church. A lot of them would be looking in a window, or they'd put them up in a pew. And, we talked about that and doing that. They'd have them in the pew watching. In Connecticut, they actually called a lot of the balconies and stuff Black Heaven.
Yes.
Yeah, that's why I was saying that it was kind of surprising that they allowed Paul Cuffee to be part of the church and allowed him to preach to both congregations, whether it be European or indigenous people. And I thought that was a big factor, how they had him preaching to, both people. That's very big.
Yes.
I'm interested in the loss of language among our people, and when sometimes we as Shinnecock say that Paul Cuffee was a seminal figure in what we call Jew meaning now, which we say is the successor to an old Feast of Flowers first fruits celebration we had in early June. But I'm wondering where, because I hadn't had time to research either, where are the records which show either the loss of language, whether he ever spoke the language. I believe the picture shows him speaking to a mixed crowd. There look as if to be Malay faces as well as Native faces in that depiction in the WPA project mural. So I'm wondering if you had any discoveries on that point. When the language was lost, when there were any words remaining that he used in his preaching. And you've talked about understanding. The understanding could be from either using a different words, or how one understood the English words that were being used.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's true, because I believe the intersectionality between religion, culture, and spirituality, those three, were used primarily when Samson Okum was, preaching in this area. So you have to, and that was a little earlier than Paul Cuffee. So the language was still, I believe, and I could be wrong, was still prevalent here at that time. And that's why they needed the indigenous person to talk to the masses. And It could be around that time. It was very hard to say because you had people coming to, I mean, let's be real. You had people coming from all over the world, basically, to this area and basically part of the eastern, part of America. But most likely here, and that's why they're so mixed. You know what I'm saying? So you have people that learned English faster, especially a lot of talkers that were pushed into mainstream, more so than the reserved people such as the Shinnecock, the Unkachuk, whereas they were able to keep their custom and language longer than the Matoka because we were forced out into mainstream. So our language was lost faster and our culture was somewhat, we assimilated faster per DNA. But I would think that the language was still, that's why they needed somebody that could speak that language to convert many people, whether it be Shinnecock, Manahasset, Unkachunk, on the Christian meditation. Yes.
This may be a little bit too local a question, and if so, I apologize. I have the Farm Museum in East Hampton, and we're doing an important study of the area called Freetown. Yes. East Hampton, we have a New York State grant to study it, because the feeling in New York State was that it never been studied before, the three cultures. Now, there was a chapel at that point, around 1800, called St. Matthew's in Freetown, and that chapel was an integrated chapel. My question is, did any preacher from Matua or any other place come and speak in St. Michael's from 1800 till 1860 when, or actually 1900, when it began to get so full that they had to think about another church down the line, which they did eventually build. So do you know if anyone from Moshock spoke in St. Matthew's in Freetown?
Well, I have someone there that has the Eastfield Historical Society on the way.
Oh, I wouldn't know. Dr. One the older gangs, perhaps, who's formerly a Latino poetry.
Yes.
So Vincent Tandu's director.
Yes.
And that she, since her family sort of touched on Freetown a bit, but he still doesn't really touch on to Freetown, so we're more so concerned in Saginaw.
Yes.
So, well,
Yes, we like to think that you're in one face and wearing another case. But Freetown has a lot of similarities, of course, to that Carver. My interest is that we're trying very hard to get the chapel back to Freetown. And at this point, we're talking millions and millions of dollars, and so what politics, I can't, I could imagine. But that chapel was the place where everyone, the blacks, freed from Gardner's Island, Montaukets, probably Shinnecock too, and Bonnapers all worshipped and partied and played and had weddings and all of that. So I just wondered if any minister habitually would speak at St. Matthew's from
Denise, I could kind of answer that. I've researched that quite a bit in that area. And to my knowledge, no.
Yep.
Anybody else? Yes.
Does any Native American group still practice their original indigenous religion before they were coerced to change?
That's a good question. I don't think they were coerced.
They had no choice. Come on.
I think that nobody, I put a gun up to their head and say you had to do it. But I believe, that's where I say there's the intersectionality between spirituality, religion, and culture. And spiritually, I'm quite sure any indigenous person in this room knows what I'm talking about. We do practice, and I'm not saying practice, we still have this innate or intuition feeling about certain things. Am I right?
Yes.
Okay. Am I right? Okay. So that's where spirituality comes in. Religion is something a little bit more that the approach, such as learning about Jesus or learning about God in a way that many of the Europeans didn't think we knew about. But in fact, we knew who the great creator was because we see it in the everyday way of living. We were the caretakers of the land, so we knew that connection. But they didn't see that side, and then culturally, like just culturally, we still practice the festivals, we still practice para, we still practice the culture. A lot of the culture has been lost because people are so spread out throughout the country, but we still have a certain part of culture that we are always interested in learning. It's like learning, like we're being woken up a little bit at a time about what it was that our great-grandparents and our great-grandparents knew about the medicinal practices. So in my age, maybe younger, have no clue. They knew about certain bushes that were nice to cure certain things. The kids today don't know. I barely know, but it's a way that we were able to, connect with the earth, connect with the spirit, and so.
Maybe it's a more of a theological type of a question, but when I hear the term to labor among the Indians or something, I know it was kind of a hard life, especially I read about Sense and Malcolm traveling in Sarazu and traveling 100 or more miles. There's often not a place to lay your head even except out in the woods. But someone getting back to Marguerite's point about to labor, was this an issue of trying to overcome language barriers or what, the laborious Paul Cuffee is wondering what that term actually entails.
Well, when they meant laborers or laborious, whatever, they were talking about the oppression and the restriction that was placed on Martuac and Indigenous people at that time because, think about it, the laws were becoming more stringent, right? The hunting rights were taken away, right? The fishing rights would be usurped. Most of the crops that we had, there were fencing people put up. So they couldn't do and conduct their way of life the way they used to. So now they had to figure out ways of doing that, and it was hard. And that's why Samson Okin preached more so of self-determination. And you can do this, we can do this, we can adapt, in more ways than one. But the laws were becoming more aware around the land of the New York State. And that's one of the reasons why he moved. Because he saw that what he thought he would be able to gain for his family and for the best of the people that were following them in the movement was going to be a better way, and it was. Yes.
I would like to speak to the fact that as a Sutki's generation bunker, we are now understanding the feeling of what it's like to be a lost tribe. Yes. Because we are being priced out of our own town. And it's not so much that we are sitting on millions of dollars of land, which is inconsequential if we're not leaving. But we're sitting on a piece of land that everybody wants for millions of dollars. And we can't make enough money. Saying the community stamping. I'm not speaking about me personally, but you can't make enough money in the community stamping to support the tax basis. You have to travel the riverhead up back to the shop. And the attitude on the streets is not what we knew. So after 13 generations, we are now the lost tribe. And we had an organization called the Lost Tribe many years ago, which we were told at one point not to say it, because after all, the Matogis deserve that hubble. We did not. Well, now we do. Now we do, because we're now 10%, and we used to be 80%. And it's all about dollars. So, I understand now what it's like to feel unwelcome, unwanted, and unneeded in a town when I grew up. So undefined. Other people sell, and I can't win.
No. It's hard. Displacement is bread and butter. However way you look at it, I see it in my own town. I know the least to beg. My family been here since 1600. So on the same land that he had Reba. But as I look around, a lot of people had newts-based oil because they can now maintain sustain living in an area. Like Zadirati and it's hard. It's hard. But if you are defiant, you'll succeed. And that's the only thing that I can say. And that's when Sam Okum was saying to the rest of his followers, you have to be subject to do better because the wars are being more stringent.
Anybody?
Yes.
Is the name Cuffee from another place in Montauk? But do you know, is it from another tribe or?
Well, the name is used interchangeably, and from what I understand, it was people use the name to reference as a boy. I don't know where that came from. But Cuffee is known throughout different places, not only in Long Island, but throughout in the Connecticut, So it's a lot of people. Like I said, when you're meshed with different people, you take on names that you really don't know. But I've seen it of course, up in Connecticut and Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Long Island, and even further down south too. Virginia based too. But people move. Yeah. We're nomadic.
So Fall Cuffee's, it's his grandfather, a first person brought back Peter?
Peter, as well as our Samuel.
Was Peter Johnson born here at the, yes, okay. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.
We have two more. There it is.
We have two more lectures in this series. The next one is burial practices. Algonquin burials. So I hope you'll join us. Please sign up if you haven't already. You'll receive our emails to remind you about the different topics. We also have a lot of other events going on. We have ecological, environmental events. We have music here. So we hope you join us in the future. Thank you again. Thank you.